Hey, everybody, and welcome to a special Thursday edition of the Weekly Wrap Up. It's Independence Day weekend. I've got my red, white, and blue on. If you didn't get that, that's a joke about me being sunburnt because I'm white and the sun doesn't like me. Or my skin doesn't like the sun, one of the two. Anyway, today I'm doing something a little less formal. It's busy, I've got family in town, don't have much time. So I didn't write a script and I'm not going to edit this video. This is going to be a bit more stream of consciousness for what's on my mind to close out the week. And a lot of you have been requesting that I go through how I start my day. And I don't mean my morning routine of running 26 miles, taking a nice bath, going to volunteer at the local orphanage, before going to the gym, then make a healthy breakfast and sit down and focus on the charts. I'm just going to focus on the charts portion because that's really what we're here to talk about. And I'm going to go through the weekly wrap up in terms of what we need to look at in the charts and look forward to next week through the lens of how I start my day and how I'm assessing the different sectors of the market to make the decisions of what I'm going to take action on that day or what sector I'm going to focus on. If we just look briefly at the macro of what happened this week, well, all-time highs were the story of the week. We closed again at new all-time highs today for the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq, and we just need to stick with that momentum and the strength in the market. The flows are moving in a positive direction, and so it doesn't make sense to fight that at the moment. And we've talked about all dips being for buying, and we see that on bad news, things just continue to get bought up. So we know where the market sentiment is at. We know that funds are underweight equities, and those are all tailwinds for us. And then also today, the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill passed, finally. There was a lot of fighting going back and forth with Representatives Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Brian Fitzpatrick is his name, from Pennsylvania. They were the only Republicans to join the Democrats in voting against the measure. If you voted for Trump in the hopes of seeing reduced spending and some work being done to manage our massive ballooning debt, you're probably not too happy about this. I'm deeply concerned about what this means for the future. We're just kicking the can down the road. But it is in the short term going to be good for assets because some of these funds are going to trickle through to the markets and increase those asset prices. So it's a mixed bag, and we're not here to really talk about politics, but generally speaking, this should be a tailwind. So let's jump into the charts. Okay, starting on the S&P 500 like we always do, and when I start my day and I sit down, I look at the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq first to see what the broader indices are doing at the market open and how they react in those first 30 minutes of the day to determine how that's going to impact the assets that I'm holding. I also have my watch list here on the right with a few names that aren't in the tabs up here that I occasionally click through just to watch gold, silver, oil, natural gas, what have you. And we closed the day at new all-time highs for both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. And we know that there's correlation, obviously, with tech names to the Nasdaq, and crypto has also been correlated to the Nasdaq. So if this is moving up, generally we can expect that crypto is also having a positive day. Today, there was definitely a bit of a slowdown on the crypto side compared to Wednesday, but all in all, things were still strong. And so first, I'm looking at these sectors just to determine where the strength is. The next thing I look at is SMH to see what semiconductors are doing because this is such a big segment of the market, and this segment really needs to be moving upwards to continue driving us to new all-time highs. And you can see that this segment wicked into new all-time highs today before closing right in line with previous all-time highs. So generally speaking, in semiconductors, there's strength. And then I'll go over and I'll just check out the holdings that I have, which is NVIDIA and TSM. And these are also in new all-time high territory with a little pullback towards the end of the day. TSM, same thing here. Then I will look at DXY next just to see where the dollar strength is, because generally as the dollar is weakening, it's good for asset prices, particularly risk assets. And this week we bounced exactly off that support zone that we've been discussing of 96.4. And you can see how that relates to previous support and resistance. And if we drop below this, I would anticipate that our next support is coming in at 94.6. And you can see how that played support and resistance. And that is really our strongest level of support in the near term. I would imagine that we are eventually going to make our way down to that 94.6. Maybe we'll see a bit of a little relief rally, but that's what I'm targeting for the ultimate pullback in the DXY before seeing some more consolidation and perhaps a bit of a recovery. Broadly speaking, I just look at this briefly to see if there's weakness in the dollar, because that is telling me that there's going to continue to be strength in Bitcoin, tech names, other risk assets that I'm invested in. After the DXY, I will just take a glance at gold to see if there's strength coming back into gold. And like we said months ago already, after this blow off top, We anticipated consolidation, and gold has just been in this tightening range. If we ever have a day where we see a spike in gold, that's telling me that it's a risk-off day, and I'm going to be more cautious in my trading, and I'm most likely expecting a pullback in markets because this is indicating a risk-off sentiment, and traders are moving into gold as a hedge. Now, silver, just because I have a position in it right now in an ETF, I click over to this one too. It's playing a bit of catch up to gold. I'm still anticipating another leg up in silver, as I've been saying. So I'm watching this consolidation zone for a breakout, but I'm not anticipating as meaningful a move in gold. So after I assess all that, next I move on to Bitcoin and Solana, because so many of my holdings are either in Bitcoin or Solana, or they are in proxies or Treasury plays. So I want to see what these markets are doing to determine what is going to happen in a large segment of my portfolio. And recently I've been starting on the weekly for Bitcoin, especially this week, because I want to see that weekly close strongly above that 62 level that we've been talking about. And I want to see us continue to move away from that. So right now it's looking good, but I'm going to be checking this Sunday night. And we've obviously had another strong week. And the thing I'm scouting now is we often talk about fourth time breakouts, and we have 1, 2, 3, and now our fourth wick into this resistance line. This one is a little beyond tolerance. Generally, you want all the wicks on a breakout test to be within 0.5%. We're about 1.1% here, higher on this one. So it's a little bit beyond tolerance, but on such a large scale as the weekly time frame, I'm still considering this to say, hey, might we get our fourth time breakout? Or are we considering this 1, 2, 3, another pullback, and then we break out? And I'm anticipating a bit more momentum to come into the move whenever we have a breakout of a zone like this. That would propel us into the 120K, maybe even the 130K range. The other thing I'm watching on Bitcoin on the weekly, and I just want to bring this back up for you guys, is this massive bearish divergence on the weekly RSI. And as we're getting close to touching this line again, please keep this on your charts and in the back of your mind. So as we've covered many times, a bearish divergence is where the price is moving higher, but the RSI cannot make higher highs. And this has been going on since the 4th of March, 2024. So for quite some time now. And in the next couple of weeks, as we come up into this zone, which I imagine would correspond with about that 120K to 130K level, the big question is, are we going to reject from this line? And that would be a sign of caution that maybe not all is well in the bull market. Or are we going to break through this line? Now, if we break through this line on the RSI, that to me would be all systems go for more of a parabolic run in Bitcoin. And I would actually be considering selling some of my other assets to move into Bitcoin or into Bitcoin proxies. But if we reject from this line, I would be de-risking a little bit by selling some of my minor positions first, then some of the Bitcoin Treasury plays. I would still hold my Bitcoin to see what this can do, because there is a world in which, just looking at seasonality, we could run up into August and test this line from the underside. We could still reject, bounce off the 62, and then we could break through it later in September, which would work with that September and later in the year seasonality for a run up. So that's another scenario that you need to keep on the cards. And the hard thing with these weekly time frame signals is that they take so long to play out. So you need to have patience to see what this is going to do. But I'm happy to de-risk with some of my leverage plays, because if Bitcoin rejects here and pulls back for a few weeks, those proxy assets that move by greater percentages are most likely going to pull back as well. And if we bounce here, I can probably find a better entry on them down the line. Beyond that, I will go into the smaller time frame. So if we jump down to the daily, you can see we've now had 2 daily candle closes above that all-important 108,500 number. So this was the level where I was saying if we would close above this and hold a daily candle above it, which now we have 2, we would most likely test the top of the range. So I'm actually looking out for that potentially going into this low volume holiday weekend. Maybe we can rally either into the holiday weekend or on Sunday evening to test this for new all-time highs. But as I'm seeing these signals of strength, I'm working my way down the timelines to see what the RSI can still do. And obviously on the daily, we still have room to run on the RSI. Then I go down to the 4-hour, and I'm seeing that, yeah, we have one mean reversion dot on the 4-hour RSI, but it's not completely overheated. You can see that the 4-hour RSI can spike way above 70, and we're not there yet. So this has a bit of room to run. If I go down to the 1 hour, Then we can see we printed a mean reversion dot. Our RSI spiked on the 1 hour and is cooling off right now. And this is actually what I would consider a fairly bullish consolidation because our RSI is cooling off to give us more room to move, but we're not correcting downward in the price action. We're actually, you have a bull flag that's completely horizontal, or one of these uptrending consolidation patterns is very bullish because it's just indicating even though there's selling pressure coming in at the top, you have buyers stepping in at higher and higher prices. So there's one wick here. I would maybe draw some underside support on this as I'm watching it, stay on the 1 hour chart. And then I'm just watching a breakdown of this for a sign of a further correction or, just a little bigger correction. And that doesn't mean this is over. Sometimes you can get a wick down and maybe we retest this 108,500 level for support and then continue to break away. But overall, this is looking fairly good to me. And we're just giving ourselves more room to run on the 1 hour. And then if you want to go down any closer than that for perp trading or anything like that, you can just see what these time frames are doing. But for all intents and purposes, for checking things on a daily basis, really daily, 1 hour, 4 hour are the time frames you want to focus on. All right, after Bitcoin, I will move on to Solana. And Solana, I assess a little bit more on the smaller time frames because I'm perp trading this and I'm perp trading some other Solana alts that are a bit beholden to the moves of Solana. As Solana goes, so will those altcoins, generally speaking. And so broadly, I assess, are we in an uptrend, downtrend, neutral consolidation? What's going on in the charts? And obviously, you can see from April 7th on the way up, we had an uptrend. We broke that resistance. Downtrend. Here, I honestly thought, even though it was a falling triangle or a descending triangle, it was a bit more consolidation because we were holding support at the 50% level of the range from April 7th to the top there. And then when we broke down, I was like, okay, this may be a further breakdown until we found support and recovered. So now, because we bottomed here, so I'm determining this bottom not only by the price action, but if we go down from the daily time frame, and we bottomed on the 4 hour RSI right there, on and on down the line. You go to the 1 hour, obviously you bottomed, and on all the smaller time frames as well. That was your bottom there. Bottom like that is telling me that it's a strong turnaround point where something's going to shift, because you can have the 15-minute RSI or the 30-minute RSI bottoming several times, even within an uptrend like this. But going back to the 4 hour, we have from our initial bottom a higher low, higher low, higher low. I have this trend line drawn in just to illustrate a bit of support. If this trend line were to break, I would change my thesis for the near term to see where we could find support. But right now, the 4 hour has come back up to the top of the range and it's cooling off, but it hasn't really dropped and we haven't broken this trend line. So I'm still assuming we're in an uptrend for my perp trading until this trend line breaks. And the other thing that is having me lean towards the north side of the market is that our daily RSI still has room to run up. And if we go back to the 4 hour or the 1 hour, we can see that there is a bit of a head and shoulders pattern or inverse head and shoulders pattern that we've been talking about here. And the target for that is at 170, which also corresponds with, well, it's a bit above the 200-day moving average now, but where this volume cluster is. So it's at 170 right there. So my base case right now is that maybe we test this line for support, but that we're eventually going to break up and test this price range before coming back down and finding some more support, and then really trying to move back up to test that 180 level and then the macro 50% at 195. So that's where my mind is. And if this trend line breaks down, then I need to change my thesis to more of sideways chop and consolidation or a correction before we find that base. Now, because my thesis is that we are still going up, as we had this major sell-off on Monday into Tuesday, I was able to get into a long with confidence here because we found support and bounced away. And then as we were getting oversold signs on the smaller time frames and on the 4 hour, I sold out there. And I was scaling in again earlier today, and just this afternoon we've started to move away, and I'm in a long on this and on FC. But there is definitely still market maker manipulation in Solana, and I just want to make this point. By looking at this price action, we had a stable base right here where buyers were stepping in. And then we had the announcement of the Solana ETF. Price rockets up into this resistance line and just massive selling kicks in. and it won't relent. And this looks very programmatic to me because you don't get any relief bounces, not even at this zone where there were all these buyers. You break through that, then we test it as resistance and eventually find our base. So this is very different to the rest of crypto and other alts you could look at. If we just switch over to FC real quick, and I'm calling Fartcoin FC because we are trying to make it a little bit more elevated and grown up. Here, that same selling pressure. So we had the announcement of the Solana ETF. We rally up into this resistance zone here, but it's more normal selling with buying coming in, selling, buying, stepping in, selling, and eventually buying, overpowering the selling at a value zone. That's a normal correction. The other thing with FC, if we just look at this larger downtrend, both Solana and this were very similar, that they were at the 50% support of their larger range. And we had this downtrend, we broke below the 50%, then we broke the downtrend and back tested it for support. And this found support where you think it would come in at the 50% level. But if we go back to Solana, Solana had a similar downtrend here. And when we broke through it and came back to test the 50%, we wicked way past that. And in terms of market manipulation, this is just wiping out leveraged longs that have a tight stop. So a lot of traders, when you see that you broke through a resistance, you're back testing it for support as you were support, you're getting into the 50%. This is a natural place to open longs. And if you are protecting your longs and they're high in leverage, you're setting a tight stop loss. And oftentimes market makers will just push through those levels to wipe out the longs before they reverse the price back up. So this and this are just classic signs on the chart of how this particular asset is being manipulated, why I've been advocating for trading other smaller cap alts on Solana if you're perp trading, because they respect the levels a bit more and there aren't these types of games going on. Okay, and over to FC briefly just to talk through a couple perp trades today. So here we had a very clear resistance level. Sorry, it's actually right there for a fourth time breakout. So I had a long here off the 50% and then got out of that because our RSI was spiking and we were to the top of the range on the 1 hour and all the time frames on down. And you can see we have retest 1, 2, 3. And here, as we were running up, again, I was in a long from down here. I'm anticipating resistance when we come into a line like this. So I sold half my position, waited for a rejection, sold the rest of it, and then I'm waiting to reload. And I was just watching this trend line that we broke through to see if it would find support. And now it's turned into a bit more of a range, but you can see we bounced close to that. So I got into a long, and here it was only the 1 minute through the 5 minute chart that was oversold. The 15 minute was in the middle of the range. And I loaded up very heavily into a long here because I know whenever we attempt a breakout on the fourth time of a resistance line like this, it's going to be a more meaningful breakout. So I played that long and then started scaling out because I didn't know exactly where this would go. And just like with Solana, we have a bit of an inverse head and shoulders here. And again, it's not the prettiest. The right shoulder is too big, but I'm still watching out for that price target, which would be around $1.45. We're at $1.24 right now. And I am looking for another breakout play to see if we can hit that level. Okay, next I'll look at the Bitcoin miners just to see what they are doing. And I got to update my trend model to the latest version. And CleanSpark is one that I just got into again after we broke through the 200-day moving average on this consolidation range. So I'm seeing where this could run. There's a lot of momentum coming into miners, particularly with tax things getting resolved. But CleanSpark, just watching it to see if the move is continuing or if we find resistance at any of these past levels. And then Iron, I've been in Iron for a long time, actually, since the bottoms here in April. And this is starting to look like a blow off top. We had a big pullback today. So I've already been on alert for this because we passed all-time highs and just the speed of the move and the size of these candles is increasing. So today, when I looked at this and we were spiking in the morning, I sold a couple covered calls just to hedge myself for downside on Iron, but I'm still going to hold it for a bit longer. I anticipate maybe a little bit of a pullback, but I really want to see how these miners are going to rally if Bitcoin moves to new all-time highs. And then I was watching BitDeer. BitDeer I got out of at this breakdown, And now I'm not in a position, but we broke back above the 200-day moving average. We're finding a little bit of resistance at the cloud. And I'm just watching this one right now because the cloud here on the daily is starting to squeeze, which you don't normally see that tight a squeeze on the daily. That just indicates that a more meaningful move is coming. And if there are tailwinds in this sector, then I would imagine that meaningful move would be to the north side. And we can just look at the 4-hour to see what's happening on the 4-hour. We are getting a little bit overheated on the RSI and mean reversion, so perhaps this cools off a little bit before it decides to move, but it's another one I'm keeping my eye on just for momentum. And then if we look at Mara had a strong day today, finally breaking out above the 200-day moving average. And this is exciting because I've been in this for a while. And the move has already been fairly meaningful from that to the top. We're already up about 50%. But the one thing that I'm seeing here is this cloud is coming in really sharply, and these outer bands of the cloud normally provide some resistance, and you can see we rejected today. And often it takes the cloud a moment. It's not just going to turn back up and let the price action rocket right back through. Normally, it takes a moment to cool off, and then it can shift up, and so the price action could do something like this and then start moving up. So I'm just looking out for that, and I noted that some of the other charts were a bit overheated. So perhaps, I don't know what the reason is going to be, but maybe the miners just take a moment to consolidate a bit next week. So that's what I'm thinking about for miners. If we move on to Tesla, we had a continued recovery today. We were battling the 200-day moving average and luckily got above that and closed just above it. So good sign for Tesla. We closed this daily gap fill and then it pulled back a little bit towards the end of the day. But I'm hoping that this can continue to move up next week. And I have some special charts that I watch on this that is indicating to me that it should go back up. We do have a bit of a wedge pattern on Tesla forming here. So if I just draw this in, oh, that's not going to be perfect, but let's fix that up. And so I'm watching this right now. It's just indicating a bit of consolidation and compression and indecision. And so as this tightens up, I would imagine we go back to the top of the range, maybe back to the bottom of the range, and then eventually break out. And I'm hoping that breakout is to the upside. A pattern like this is a bit more neutral. And the only thing that shifts the odds in the favor of a breakout northward is that we came into it from the bottom up. So that gives you a slight advantage to a break up. And a breakdown from a pattern like this would not be great because the price target would be fairly low for that. So keep your eye on Tesla next week. Okay, if we're moving on to MicroStrategy, this one is a bit more exciting because we know we had that blow-off top in November, and often these blow-off tops can mark cycle highs. And a lot of analysts have been saying if you look at MicroStrategy from the last cycle, it hit its all-time highs way before the top of the bull run for Bitcoin, and it still went up, but it didn't make a new higher high. So they're projecting that forward to what MicroStrategy is going to do now and saying it probably won't hit a new all-time high. Well, I would suggest that this time is a little bit different, which I know are dangerous words, but the company is much different. The backdrop for Bitcoin and digital assets is much different. And I think there are going to be continued tailwinds. And the other thing that's pointing to that, you're probably wondering what these lines are here. Well, we do have a bit of a cup and handle pattern here on MicroStrategy. Ugly handle, but a handle nonetheless. These are not very common patterns, but they are continuation patterns. So they generally happen, whereas like a head and shoulders or a double top, double bottom will happen at the tops or bottoms of swings. This happens in the middle of a pattern and is a sign of continuation where you have a blow-off top euphoria and a sharp sell-off, you find value here, in this case at the 200-day moving average. You come up to retest these high prices, a little bit more of a sell-off, but buying comes in at a much higher price than it did before. And this is not yet confirmed, but if we break this neckline here, which is sitting at, 425, if we take the tops of the wicks, let's just say 430, just to be a bit conservative. Then you measure the bottom of the cup there, project it out to wherever you break out, and that would give us a price target of about $620 right there, which seems very interesting and plausible for MicroStrategy. If you do a just projection off the last run up, and I won't take it all the way from the bear market bottom, but let's just say before the start of our more parabolic move to the all-time high currently, and we project that off of our low here on April 7th, that would get us to a price of $727. So about $100 range there. And I would just right now figure that we could hit somewhere between that 620 to, I'm going to be conservative and say 687. I've had this green line drawn for a long time as a target. If I'm going to be quite honest, I drew this months ago, I think before our all-time high, as a target, and I can't remember how I calculated that, but I'm going to be curious to see how close we get to that line. So bookmark this, 686, my mystery prediction that I can't remember how I got there, but we'll see if that hits. Okay, if we look quickly at the pair chart, I had a false swap yesterday where right here, as we were getting this trend flip, I went into Tesla. I thought I was doing great, and then it flipped right back to MicroStrategy. So early today, I had to flip back into MicroStrategy. It was a bit inefficient, but not too much of a loss overall. And I'm just sticking with this trend. And this seems to make sense. Tesla, like we saw in the charts, is most likely recovering, but it's still in a bit of indecision and that tightening consolidation pattern, whereas MicroStrategy could really be set to run, especially if Bitcoin moves over the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised to see a gap up open on MicroStrategy if Bitcoin moves over the holiday weekend. So hopefully you are in MicroStrategy if you are pair trading this. After I go through all those charts, then I'll move over to some of my other holdings, and Hood is one that I've been looking at. And right now we said maybe we could hit that blow off top target of 110 to 115, but this looks very much like a topping pattern where you have a center candle with a big wick to the upside, and then you have red candles on either end of it. This feels a little bit like a reversal, and also we have this spike in volume, and we know that volume spikes can often lead to a turnaround. So just to be safe, I sold a few more covered calls today. I had sold those other covered calls when we were at that $85 level when we hit our first price target. And, you know, this came on a big news event, and I just suspect that this is going to cool off for a little bit. I was scouting actually more of a real blow off top with gap up opens to get us into this target, but with this candle we had today, paired with what the rest of the market was doing, where the rest of the market was moving up and this was cooling off, I was just being a little careful. I said, you know what, I'm going to sell a few more covered calls and just hedge a little bit of the downside if we correct. And after Hood, I just look over to Coin to see what that's doing. As we said earlier in the week, we hit our target of that 370. It actually went all the way up to 380. Corrected a little bit. Now we're finding resistance on the cloud here. So I imagine this is either going to grind around a little bit or perhaps have a bit of a correction. There is an ultimate price target of 440, 450. And so perhaps this just consolidates a little bit and lets the RSI and charts cool off before it moves up later in the year. And perhaps that corresponds with a bit more of a run in crypto and digital assets. So I'm just keeping my eye on this one. I've been out of it for a while, but if there were for some reason to be a bigger correction in this, it could be an interesting one to look for an entry on. So that's just why I'm keeping tabs on it. If we go over to HIMS, we hit an interesting level today. So when we had that big sell-off correction because of the Novo Nordisk deal falling through, that was definitely an overreaction. We bounced away strongly, and we found support here at the 382 level. So perfect Fibonacci level to find support at. Then we bounced away and we had a little bit of correction into the 50%. And as we were bouncing actually before this today, I added a little bit to my position, and my target right now for this would be this volume cluster right here, which is at $56 for a near-term target. And I'm just projecting out what this eventually could do. Our full gap close would be way up here at $61, but there's definitely been some value taken out of the business. I think they would have to maybe have an announcement of a new partnership for another weight loss drug to get us up to that range. But I got into a little bit more of a position, and I'm just looking now to ride this up and find resistance around that level and then see what it can do. And I would most likely take a little bit off my position right there because HIMS is not in my long-term hold bag. HIMS is more of a swing trading position. Next one on my list for assets that I'm watching is Celsius, and this one I haven't been keeping tabs on as regularly because it's just grinding its way up to our price target around that $60. And right now we are just starting to get into resistance. That resistance is between 48.50 and 52.50. So I'm anticipating that this is going to slow down a little bit, as we saw by this small weekly candle, and I've been watching this on the weekly. But if we go into the daily, you can just see how a bit of momentum is coming out of that move. We're at the top of the range for the RSI. So I anticipate that this is just going to continue to chop around a little bit, form a base, and then have a more meaningful move to that price target. So not much action I'm taking here. I have call options on it, and I'm holding spot, one that I'm just clicking through quickly and not taking too much action on. Another one that I'm watching is Palantir. I got out of my position a while ago on Palantir, but Palantir had two of the biggest shorts placed on it earlier this week that I just have me watching this stock right now to say, what does some insider potentially know that they shorted a stock with this much momentum? We know we're also into resistance. If you draw this overside trend line, we rejected from that again. So watching this one for a pullback. And if we do pull back to a decent level, first line of support, I'm always looking at that 50% at $106. Could be a nice entry for Palantir if you're looking to build a position. But I would advocate for not chasing this one right now. Just watch it, see if we break down from this underside support here, and then see where we eventually bounce. It really just feels like with those two huge shorts put on this, someone knows something about one of their government contracts, and some news might come out that cause us to drop briefly, and those are good moments to get in on. So just keeping my eyes on this. All right, next on my tabs is SMLR, which I have a position in that I built again at the bottom of this support range. And I talked about this swing trade being a great entry because I knew if we broke down below this level, $28, which we have a support going way back in time here, that was my invalidation. And so I layered in here. We wicked a little bit below, but I held on to it, and luckily it bounced away. And then we rejected here at the $44, had a pretty meaningful pullback. And I was honestly considering getting out some of my position as we broke this 50%, but I just gave it some time right now with how the general market is trending. And we found support there, and we're continuing to bounce away. So I'm hoping this one can close above the 200-day moving average. And honestly, between you guys, this microphone and the wall, I have not set my profit taking target yet. So that's something I need to do next week. I need to see if we can break these highs, where I anticipate the bounce going to, because this is not a pristine asset and not something I want to hold long term. And I need to develop that strategy of where I want to start taking profits on this trade. After SMLR, I look at SMCI. And this one I got into just recently when we bounced off the 200-day moving average, and it's found support on this underside line for a long time. We broke underneath on those tariff terrors right there, but this stock had a great base of support here that we bounced off in this correction. And right now we're holding above the 50%. We backtested it this week. So this chart is looking quite strong for me for a breakout. So got in at about $39. Right now we're at about $49. So not too bad. But if we continue making higher lows, my assumption is that we're going to pass this previous peak at $66. And my projection right now is that we'll get about to 77. And I'm just taking this from this previous move up, dropping it to that low. And that makes sense with where some of this volume picks up. And we have these previous bottoms here from our all-time high consolidation range before the breakdown. So no real action I'm taking on this one right now. I'm just riding this one out for the next couple weeks or couple months. And I'm just watching major lines like this 50%, a breakdown back below this, or a breakdown below this trend line would have me considering the fact that I should perhaps exit some of my position. All right, next chart I'm looking at is BBAI, and I got out of this today because I still had a small position from this bottoming pattern. and we got into resistance here on this daily cloud. This started looking like a blow off top to me. So being into resistance here, this kind of escalated move up, just had me saying, okay, you got in down low, you know, in the $3 to $4 range, and now we're at the $8 range. Just take some off the top, or take all of it off the top, because this is a risky play. So got out of this position today. All right, and then the last thing I'll do is I'll look at the Bitcoin Treasury plays and other proxies just to see what those are doing, because those are riskier plays that I'm day trading a bit more. And Galaxy Digital, it has been a little bit weak, but we broke above the 50%. I'm drawing this fib level from the IPO price. I guess this existed before it was available to the public, and there's some charting data on the daily. But we got back above that and now are testing it for support. We did get this sell signal here on the confluence model, and our mean reversion is spiked on the 4-hour, and our RSI is near the top of the range. So I'm watching this carefully. A breakdown would have me considering potentially trimming some of my position, but right now I'm not taking an action, and I'm just seeing what this can do next week. And assuming Bitcoin is strong, I'm guessing that some strength would come back into some of these Bitcoin Treasury plays, because they've been a bit weak the last couple of weeks. If we go over to the next one, which is KNW, which is another one I'm in. This one I was watching carefully. I had gotten out of some of my position once we broke below the 50%, and I actually started adding to it once we found a bit of support here for a couple of days here at this last consolidation range, and it's just starting to move away right now. So I'm watching this one for now, potential resistance as we come into this 50% level and this volume cluster, and that might correspond with the RSI getting a bit overheated here on the 4-hour. So again, I'm trading these over just a couple days or a couple weeks at a time. I got in really early on this one at 80 something cents, rode it up, sold a lot of my position up here, sold a little bit more as we broke down below the 50% and back tested it for resistance, and then added to the position again. And then I'm looking to get out of it here. So just as I'm clicking through this daily, I'm saying, are we getting close to that resistance zone? What's our RSI doing? What's the mean reversion doing? Does it look like I should trim some of my position? Next one on my list is ASST, which has been quite weak, and we've talked about this a lot, about entry and getting out and in at different points. And right now, after this falling wedge play where I got in and it ran up and didn't hit my price target, I just sold like 20% of my shares here. We've just been in this downward trend. I guess you could argue that this is a big falling wedge that you could draw here, but I just got back into it. My ultimate price target, where I had a limit order, I had a small limit order at 336 here at this dotted line, which, let me bring the price action back in, where this volume cluster starts. And then with how weak this was, I was actually considering, gosh, are we going to drop all the way back down to $2.51? And my initial buy was at $2.75, so almost back to where we started. And so I still have those limit orders open, but we had this range here, and I drew this line over the top. And as we broke out yesterday, I got into a little bit of a position. And then as we tested that for support today and bounced away, I actually got some calls, I did some synthetic longs really, to see where this can go. And now I'm looking for resistance at that 382, which is at like 550. And those calls could do pretty well off that move, you know, from the low $4 range up to that 550 range. And if we break through there, then 50% to that 778 would be the next level overhead. And if Bitcoin continues to run, I'm looking for strength to come back into these. Now, word of warning, because these move by such big percentages, I have my stop order for these set right below this line where this support level is at 379. So just below there is my stop order. So if this moves against me, I would close that position at a small loss, and then I still have these two limit orders open. So this is almost like perp trading, playing with these because of the large percentages that they can move by. All right, the other trade I took today was on NAKA, or Kindly MD. I was watching this wedge right here to see which way it would break, and unfortunately it broke down, and we broke below that 382. I gave it a little bit of time, but we broke down, back tested it for resistance, and that price target is all the way at the 200-day moving average and this volume cluster, which puts us down at 377, let's just say 380, which is right before the initial big breakout. So this chart is just looking a bit weak, and with that price target, I sold all of my knockup position just to de-risk a little bit because not all these Treasury plays are created equal. And you will see that the chart here on the 4-hour, the mean reversion dots are firing, RSI is getting close to the bottom of the range. So that's saying that, oh, maybe we could move back up and this is a fake out, but I just want to de-risk a little bit. There's also, if you turn on a bunch of fib support lines, there is a fib pocket forming right here where all these lines come together. I don't have the indicator turned on right now, but someone pointed that out to me that, hey, we might just be moving into the fib pocket and then could move away from there. Certainly a possibility, but I have like 8 of these Treasury plays going and it has just become too much to monitor. So I wanted to focus on a bit less and free up some capital for other things. So that's why I made that call. Let's move over to DFDV. On DFDV, we have this strong underside support line, which is great for us now to give us a level to work off of. If we come back down, we can anticipate support there. And if it breaks down, then we know we need to change our thesis and we're looking to the south side of the market. So I've just been checking in with this one. I'm still in my position from a long time ago. And then I have some smaller swing trades that I've been building on this breakout here of this line. I added to my position and I've been watching this level overhead by these previous tops, which we just broke through. We're right at these tops. So I'm watching this to the 50% for potential resistance. And if we break above that $27, I'm anticipating that DFDV can go on a fairly good run from here. I guess we still have these peaks at the 618 at $33. But with this, I'm just watching it and anticipating movement to the north side. Okay, so that's it for the charts. I do have more names that are on my watch list, like OKLO that I sold out of a few weeks ago. I've got AMD on there. I've got some uranium stocks. I'm watching natural gas and a few other commodities, but that's just too much to go through. But those are the basic charts that I'm looking at. And I'm really doing that every morning when I sit down because I want to get a fresh picture of where the market is at and what each of these assets are doing and how they're interconnected. And I hope that was helpful for you to just see how I'm thinking about things and how that influenced my actions that I took today in the market. So, it was a few trades, a few options, selling a couple of things. Not every day is quite that active, but this year has been generally more active than me. 23 and 24 were much less active, just holding those positions long term. And now I'm really trading those swings a lot more to try to maximize this volatility that we have in the market. Overall, I'm thinking we're going to continue up over the next couple of weeks. Crypto looks positive. We might have some cool offs and consolidations, but Bitcoin really looks poised to potentially make a move. So keep your eye on that. Hope you all have a lovely holiday weekend, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. This isn't financial advice. Past results are not indicative of future performance. Do your own research.